All right. Now we're really where the mubble meets the
The
road. the rebel the the
the
rubber
rubber
meets
meets
the
the
road.
road.
That's where we're at. The mubble meets the mode. I don't know what I was going for. Okay, so discipleship. We said from the very beginning that this whole study is about making disciples, right? That's what we're doing, and it's what we're doing in every single lesson. We're trying to lay out a vision for discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple or a follower of Jesus, and why should you embrace that and then grow in that? So we're going to go deeper into that in this lesson. This lesson is basically lesson 4. So it's why it drives me crazy when people spend a year meeting FOJ and never like finish in lesson 3. I'm like, you didn't even get to the point of the study.
Yeah.
It's so important that we get here and that we talk about this stuff. The word disciple, it has its own connotations now, but it isn't a word that we use nearly as much. It was not, again, an exclusively Christian word at all in the first place. And the word that we tend to use today, Christian, is not a word that's used very much in the New Testament. So the word Christian is used a couple of times. One of them is here at the top of the page in Acts 11, where you see that it's the non-Christians, the non-believers who start calling Jesus's disciples Christians, little Christs or Christ people. And so that happened first at Antioch. But this word disciple gets used, I don't know, something like 270 times in the New Testament compared to 2. So it's this Greek word mathetes, and it just means a learner or someone who follows someone's teachings. The old way of doing schooling, and you see this in the New Testament. If you read the Gospels, you'll see that they talk about the disciples of the Pharisees or the disciples of John the Baptist. Or this was kind of the common way, is that you would find a teacher, you would apply to that teacher that you wanted to learn from them, and you were trying to become like them. In one place, I think it's in maybe Luke 6, where Jesus just says the student or the disciple is the word, the mathetes, who's fully trained will be like his teacher. And that's a little different than we tend to think of today. I'm not usually trying to become like my teachers, my professors, except in maybe knowing the information that they know about this topic. And I usually don't even want to know as much about it as they know. I just only want to know enough to get my grade and move on to my next thing. But that's not what this is about. So we're talking about this call of Jesus to be a disciple, and what really is that call on our lives.
It's good. I'm excited for this one. This one you really get to the meat of things.
Yeah.
And get to talk about what does it actually mean to follow Jesus. Because I think people use that term Christian very loosely, and what does that actually mean to be an actual follower of Jesus.
Well, and even today with Christian being so politicized, and for so many people it means it has a lot of negative connotations. And I think you can strip some of that away by getting back to what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
So Matthew 9 to 13 is the story of Jesus calling Matthew, or Levi, the tax collector. And there's a bunch of these stories towards the beginning of the Gospels where Jesus will find someone and say, "Come follow me." And so this invitation to follow is the invitation to discipleship. And then he goes to this tax collector, and tax collectors are, very unpopular because they have essentially sold out to the Roman oppressors. And so they don't hang out with respectable people. So you've got all these tax collectors and sinners, and there's a party, and everyone's kind of sitting around judging Jesus for spending time with such people. And Jesus makes this point that it's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick. And so there's this big contrast that Matthew draws in this story between the typical rabbis of the day who are only going to take the best of the best, those people have to, go to, like people that want to follow them have to go and apply and beg. And then Jesus is kind of taking anyone. So it's kind of like, the rabbis of the day are Harvard and Yale. They have a very low acceptance rate. Everyone knows about them. Everyone wants to be a disciple. And Jesus is like the party school no one's ever heard of, who's just like sending out flyers. Come on, come here. I got a spot for you in my team. And so there's this great message, though, in the heart of this. One, the message that Jesus says is, "Come follow me," and we'll explore more what that means. But that he's not just calling righteous people. This call is for all kinds of people. There are righteous people that he calls, and people that have studied and seem to know a lot, and they show up too, but they have to learn to rub shoulders with people that they didn't think would get in, that they didn't think deserved admission into this college. And so while in one sense it is, we know, the most exclusive college, the things that get you in is your willingness to come, not your impressive accomplishments and that kind of thing. So he's not just calling righteous people, he's calling you, he's calling me. And that's good news for us. And it's good news for our friends. So going on to Luke 9, I love this story. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell this story. And basically it comes at the midpoint of of Jesus's ministry, that right at the point where the disciples kind of finally admit or are coming to the realization, there's kind of this "who do you think I am" moment, and they're like, "We think you're the Messiah, like we think you're from God." And so Jesus is like, "Yeah, you got that. That's great. God revealed that to you." But then he starts teaching. And the different gospel writers will use language like, from that point on, he started teaching them that. What's a Messiah do? Because they've got the title right, but they have the image completely wrong. And so as soon as they figure out like, "Oh, you're the one we've been waiting for," he's like, "Yes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be rejected, and then I'm going to be killed. And then 3 days later, I'm going to come back to life. Now, if you want to come with me," which again, the coming with me is the language of following, of being a disciple. He says, which again, even that is sort of absurd to me, because it's kind of this like, they're like, "Oh, I respect you so much. I want to be like you." It's like, "Oh, great. I'm going to go downtown and get beat up. If you want to come with, you have to pay some money." And you're like, "No, I don't even want the beat up part, much less the cost to get there part." But that's what he says. This is the path. This is where I'm going. And so if you want to be a part of it, what Luke records, he says you have to deny yourself. It's not about me. I am not the center of the universe. God is. It's a bigger deal. You have to take up your cross daily. Now remember, these people, they didn't know the cross as, the center of the Christian faith and stuff. They just knew they'd seen people crucified, and they'd seen people being forced to carry their crosses to the place of their own execution. And he says, you gotta pick that up every day, because at the end of that path is the death of self.
Wow.
Right? And then he says, and you have to follow me, because that's where I'm going. I'm going to go down that path. And then it goes into this whole thing of it, because if you try to hold on to your life, you're going to lose it. But if you'll walk this path with me, then you'll find life at the end. Because he just told them, I'm going to go and I'm going to lose my life, but then I'm going to get it back. And he's going to get it back permanently. That's our conviction, right? Jesus didn't just get resuscitated from death. He went through death to the other side to live forever. And he's like, you've got to come with me on this path. I can take you there. No one else can take you there. Yeah. No one else is going there. So that's the invitation to discipleship. And it should be a little bit jarring. It's a deny yourself and take up your cross every day and follow. That's what the invitation is. And it's not just add a badge to my Boy Scout or Girl Scout vest. oh, and I'm also a Christian. I'm also a good person. No, that's not going to work. And you're never going to pay that price if you think it's just about getting a badge. So.
Yeah, that one kind of reminds me of what we read in the last study where we were talking about what it looks like to really give up yourself for others.
Yeah.
And denying yourself is so much that, which is so contrary to what we read and see out in our society now. It's all about ourselves, and Jesus' call is so opposite of what they'd probably expect.
Yeah. So John 8, what Jesus says here is, if you hold to my teachings, then you're really my disciples. And he says, and then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And this idea that to be really his disciple, you have to hold to his teaching, is actually kind of flies in the face of a lot of modern Christianity. I talk to so many young people who sort of want to sit in judgment upon Jesus's teachings. Well, I agree with this and I don't agree with this. And obviously that's your freedom, but you're not really a disciple if you're not committed to learning from and becoming like the master. You're just you think you're also a rabbi, ready to sit and criticize the great rabbi and take some things and throw some things out. But what Jesus says is that you have to be really his disciple in order to know the truth. That there's some truth understanding that comes from living and being his disciple. The truth isn't just an informational thing that I can kind of memorize. It's something that comes experientially through living and being Jesus's disciple. And at the end of that comes freedom. That's the kind of truth that can set us free. Not just a memorizational kind of truth. Lots of people know lots of stuff. And we know that in life, right? It's people will, lecture us on exercise. And I'm like, I don't really want your advice on exercise. Or they'll lecture us on how to study. And I'm like, I think my grades are better than yours. I don't really want, And so there's lots of good information out there. But there's a difference between information and wisdom.
Yeah.
Between information and transformation. And that's what Jesus is saying. If you want to be set free, if you want to live your most free life, he says that's going to come through embracing my teachings, holding to them, trusting me, and learning from me.
Yeah. I remember having to ask, if the Lord is king of your life, then he's king of all parts of your life. And that includes parts that maybe you're not ready to embrace that. But it's something to continue thinking about. And what it means to be a disciple is that every part of you now belongs to this other person.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we've gotten we're so taken in by our culture is all about selling stuff, right? It's this consumer selling economy. We're always advertising and trying to sell someone. And so it's kind of this oh, well, if you don't like this part of Jesus, you'll like this part. And I'll, just take just this piece. And obviously there is a sense in which we step into this, but it's dishonest marketing to say that you can buy some and not all. Jesus doesn't leave any room for that. He invites people to follow him. And as we read this story, you see a lot of people, they get to one message they don't like and then they quit.
Yeah.
Because they understood that it was a package deal and they didn't want the package. And I think we're so afraid of offending or of someone not liking that we don't present the package deal. That Jesus is saying he's smarter than you, he knows more than you, he's wiser than you, and you would do better to give up every opinion you have and replace them with his. Not, Jesus needs a critic. He needs someone who's really smart. He's really been looking for an 18-year-old who knows so much about the world to criticize all of his teachings. Thank goodness 2,000 years later, we came along, and that's sometimes the way we talk about it. But, and I get it that there is an offensiveness to this, but Jesus did offend people.
Yeah.
And he offended powerful people, and he offended powerless people, and he offended a lot of people because his message was, at the heart of this, you have to deny yourself. You're not the smartest one. You're not the most important one. God is doing bigger things. You're important because you're important to him, not in and of your own right. It's kind of the difference between teaching a little kid that they're special, which makes them feel entitled, like they should get special treatment everywhere, versus teaching them you're special to me. You know, that the specialness is a relational thing, not an entitlement thing.
Yeah.
And I think we have brought that over into the realm of faith sometimes. So, yeah.
That's good.
John 13, this is following on. We studied this a couple of lessons ago where Jesus, knowing all of his power, who he was, he got down and washed their feet, right? And then just a little while later, he says, I want you to love one another like I've loved you. He calls it a new command. He's like, I'm leveling up. The old command was love your neighbor as yourself. You were the standard. And now he says, I'm the standard. Love each other like I love you. And then he says, this is how people will know you're my disciples. And that is so important for us to hear, because I think today it's like, how do you know someone is Jesus's disciple? It's like, well, they've got all, they think the right thing on all these contemporary political issues, or these contemporary theological issues, or they go to the right church, or they don't do this, or, all these different things. But Jesus says, no, the way people will know if you're my disciple is if you love like I love. And that actually redraws the circle pretty significantly from the way that is going on in a lot of the world right now, and in a lot of American Christianity. But we need to hear that message. That how is Jesus measuring? It's are you following and becoming like me in this? And how does he love? Well, it's a self-sacrificing love, right? We saw in the last lesson, be completely humble and gentle. What exemplifies that more than Jesus on his knees washing feet, right? He knew he was better than them. Just a little while later, he's going to tell Judas, you're going to betray me tonight. He's going to tell Peter, you're going to deny me tonight. By the time morning comes around, only one of those 12 is going to be there with him in his hour of greatest need. But he was completely humble and gentle. It wasn't about, well, finally you guys are good enough, so I'll wash all your feet. It was like, it doesn't matter how good you are. It matters who I am. Knowing who he was, and that he came from the Father, and that he was going back to the Father, he got up and took off his outer clothing and got down on his knees. And that's the example he set for us.
Yeah.
We love not because everyone around us is lovable. We love because he loved us and showed us how to love. And the how to love wasn't based on everyone else's lovability. It was based on his relationship with God. And we can do that too.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that also goes hand in hand. As you're like, this person's in core or even in their class, they're going to face a lot of different people. And how are they going to treat people that are different than them?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes in core, we get that person that's difficult, or, in whatever way, they're annoying or they're offensive or whatever that is. And we think if we could just get rid of them, just get them to act right, then core would be perfect and wonderful, and we would all be better Christians. And I think actually, no, it's our maturity is growing because of how we treat those people. I remember having some Corpus tell me a few years ago, they're like, yeah, we have these, these serious about God freshmen. And then we have this one person that's not a Christian, and they keep cussing and saying offensive things. We're like, how do we talk to them to get them to stop? And Mandy and I were like, you don't. You need to talk to those other 6 about what does it look like to love someone who's a seeker of Christ but hasn't given themselves, like to get over yourself and your comfort zone and to get down and wash their feet. Feet are dirty. Feet are gross, you know, especially when you've been walking around in sandals on dirt roads all day long. Yeah. And we don't get to do that physically, but maybe we do that conversationally. When I go into a conversation that I just feel dirty after. Well, Jesus felt dirty after he washed their feet, you know, but they were cleaner. And that's the mark. That's what he's trying to do. A little while later, same night, John 15, Jesus uses this powerful image. It comes from the Old Testament, but he says, I'm the vine and you're the branches. If you remain in me and I remain in you, if we stay closely connected, he says, you're going to bear a lot of fruit. And then at the end of it, he says, this is how you can show yourselves to be my disciples, is by bearing fruit. But the question is, what is fruit? What does that even mean? You know, and I like to ask people to think, like, what does fruit do for a plant? And what does fruit do more generally? Because for the plant, fruit is reproductive, right? The fruit is what has the seeds in it. But fruit isn't simply in our world reproductive for plants. We also eat it. It nourishes animals and other people. And it's not just like, we don't tend to think of fruit as the most unpleasant nourishment, the most bland nourishment. We think of it's sweet. It brings joy and refreshment. And I think Jesus uses this word purposefully because it's not just about more people are going to be disciples, but also just the blessing that you're going to be. You're going to nourish the people around you. If you stay close to me, if you're being fed by the vine, more the seed's going to get planted in more places, and more and more and more of this is going to grow. And I also, the image, this is a slightly different image, but Jesus uses this image of water, right? You know, that he talks about water's coming out of me. And then in another place he says, you know, from your heart will gush rivers of living water. And I remember hearing someone describe driving through the sort of arid eastern part of Colorado, and how it's just brown, you know, but you can sometimes see in the distance like a strip of green or a big spot of green, and you know there's water over there. Like there's some sort of a river or a pond or something that everything's green. It's the oasis in the desert kind of thing. And that's I think this image of what is it like to be a disciple? What does it look like around me? When people get around a Jesus person, it should all be green and all those plants should have fruit on them. You know, it's like, oh, wow, what's going on around here? And as I said with the last lesson, I think that's been a big part of the powerful, transformative thing for some people of being in a community like ours, is that they get around, it's like, why is everyone treating each other like this? Why is this so much more pleasant? Why is no one cutting me down or rude to me or mean to me? Why do I feel seen and cared for? And we should do that more and more. Right. You know, to the extent that we've already had Christ do that in us, we can celebrate, but we're not completely that way yet. Not by a long shot. We've got a lot of growing to do. Yeah. And then Luke 14, this is one of those passages that should be kind of offensive to us. I always note here, if you read the very beginning of Luke, verse 25 there.
Large crowds are traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said. And
so this is one of those things, when you read the Gospels, you find that typically if it tells you that a large crowd is there to listen to Jesus speak, you're about to get one of his most challenging sermons. The gospel, right? The apostles are always gathering big crowds, and Jesus is always running them away, you know, or running them off. And so Jesus does not cater to the big crowds. He gives his toughest sermons his toughest to understand, his toughest to stomach, to the big crowds. He wants people who are serious. If you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciple. He's not really interested in having a crowd. He's interested in having people who are really his disciples. And so if you're just here to hear sweet words, it's like, well, go, cut your Bible up and paste some things up. Hobby Lobby has some great things that you can put up on your wall. But that's not being a disciple of Jesus. It's something else that we made up.
Yeah.
But what does he say here? He says, if you come to me, you have to hate. Which, hate? This whole message has been about love all along, right? But you have to hate father, mother, brother, sister, even yourself. And we've got, this flies in the face of so much today. Oh, you got to love yourself before you can love anyone else. And da, 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 da. And obviously, they're not necessarily using these words in the exact same way, but Jesus is saying, no, you need to, this is the language of allegiance. That compared to me, everyone else has to look like you hate them. Now, he will lead us to love the people around us in incredibly deep ways. He's already said, you have to love people like I love, this foot-washing, selfless kind of love. But so often in the world, love and allegiance go hand in hand. It's how our parents hold it over us, that it's like, if we love them, we will just obey them. Jesus uses that language. If you love me, you'll obey my commands. But that's exclusive language, right? Not everyone can be Lord. Jesus says you can't serve both God and money. Ultimately, you'll love one and hate the other. In other words, you're going to obey one and disobey the other. And so you have to decide, is it mom and dad or is it Christ? Is it success or is it Christ? Is it, whatever career or is it Christ? Is it my significant other or is it Christ? If we give Christ lordship, he says the truth is going to set us free. It's going to bring great things into our lives, but it can also bring painful things into our lives, especially in the short run. So, and that's why he goes on and he gives two different parables about kind of counting the cost. Like, don't start down this road until you've really considered, no, I actually think building that tower is worth it and not having all the money that it costs to get there. I actually think going into this war, even knowing I'm going to lose a lot, it's going to cost a lot, I think coming out the other side is going to be better. And Jesus is like, yeah, you don't be dumber than people in the world. It's like, don't be dumber than when you build a building or pick a fight. This is because you're doing both. You're building something and you're taking on some pretty big enemies if you join Jesus's side in this thing. So count the cost before you start, because there is a cost.
But it's worth it.
But it's worth it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think some of that I've used too to say, like, at the end of the day, like, you will answer to the Lord. And your money or your success isn't going to be there to, like, back you up. It's going to be you and your relationship with God. But if he knows you or if he doesn't know you, or if you knew him or didn't know him, that's what's going to matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much of wisdom in this world is about thinking long term, right? That I'm going to decide to study tonight because I'm thinking a few weeks down the road to when I, am going to have to take that test or do that assignment or whatever that is. Or I'm going to save every month now because a few years down the road, I want to be able to buy a car or have a down payment for a house or whatever that is. And Jesus actually looks at that and says, but the wisest things that the world has to offer, which is like, what do you want your life to look like when you're 70, can actually lead you to a certain foolishness in the bigger scheme. He's like, I'm talking about what's wise past death. You can't take any of that stuff with you. And so there are things that can look really wise to the world. And I'm not saying it's bad to save or, Jesus will lead us to seek wisdom on a lot of things. But there are things we will do that will look foolish if you follow Jesus, because Jesus looked foolish at times. But it's our conviction that Jesus was no fool. I remember one of my mentors asking this question. We're talking about a conflict, and one person saying, I just don't know if I can trust them. That I don't know if they're telling me the truth in this, relationship. And he just said, oh, he's like, well, the person who trusts someone is never a fool. Love always trusts. He's like, the person who lies is always the fool. And he's like, do you think Jesus was a fool for trusting Judas? Or do you think Judas was a fool for betraying Jesus? And that has been formative for me, that it's like, okay, sometimes I have to change my view of what's foolish and what's wise to fit Jesus, rather than coming up with something I'm like, no, I don't think Jesus was a fool. I think he knew more than anyone else knew. He had a bigger perspective. Wow. And then, this is another one of those uncomfortable questions, right? Based on these, are you living as a disciple? Is that how you would define yourself? And then you got to just shut up and let them kind of think about it. And then sometimes it's like, yeah or no. And so you've got a follow-on question depending on that. If yes, how is that? Just tell me about that. Because I've asked that question and I'm thinking like, really? You think yes? I'm like, well, what's that look like in your life? And sometimes they stall out at that point. And then what's the response, if not? And I would again say this third and fourth circles would be where I would put this, because this is about Jesus came into the world, to heal and to bring restoration, but this is what he calls us to respond with. This is how we embrace what he's doing. And then, of course, how we become a part of this, that he comes in, has this transformative impact on the world. And then he's like, now go out and act like me. Go out and do that again. So that instead of one Jesus, we've got thousands or millions, which is why I think he could say, it's actually better for you if I go. That we're not just, oh, maybe one day we can encounter Jesus if we get enough money scraped together to travel to the Middle East. But no, I can encounter Jesus every day because his people are in the world and his spirit is in them. The discipleship homework or for further study, one thing you might consider on these is doing these with the person you're teaching. I mean, these are just great exercises every once in a while, but I would look at this first one is just about what does it look like to live as Jesus did, and then the second one, this making a list of the things that you value, relationships, possessions, plans, all this kind of stuff, and then asking, is there something I wouldn't be willing to give up for Jesus? It's like, this is rubber meets the road. Mother meets the mode kind of stuff, right? This is where we've got to get. And if they're like, yeah, I'm not willing to give up being a doctor, or I'm not willing to give up having kids, or I'm not willing to give up my mom being proud of me, or whatever that is, it's like, okay, well, you need to go talk to God about that. And often that's not the non-Christian that's telling me that. That's the person that's lived their life in the church telling me that. And they too need to hear the call to discipleship, as do I.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Any final thoughts?
I don't think so.
All right. Till next time.